music down. I think that worked. I'm never too sure with Twitch, but I think we're live. Hello. Hey.
Hi, Twitch.
Hi. Hi, Twitch. Hi, Mike. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Hi, KP. It's been a long time. Yeah, this is my first time on Twitch.
Is it really? Well, congratulations. Mazel tov.
I have like zero experience or knowledge of Twitch.
It's like YouTube but live, I guess.
Yeah.
It's got
I know what it is, just like the culture I'm not familiar with.
Our mutual friend Ron could probably give you a much better elevator pitch than me, but it's great. I do love Twitch. I watch a lot of Twitch. I've been streaming, not enough, but infrequently since I guess last summer. And it's definitely for like recording conversations like this, it does make it a lot easier than some of the tools that we used to use way back in the yonder days of the Two States podcast.
Right. Well,
is that an expression
I do have familiarity with is our topic of conversation today, The Sopranos.
It's back, baby.
Did you watch it originally when it aired?
I think I started watching it live in season 3 or 4. I caught up like for season 3 or 4 and then watched it live from there on out.
I think we are about the youngest people who probably watched it live.
Probably right.
Because there's this whole phenomenon now where like, there's that big New York Times Magazine feature and a lot of other talks about how like it's having a resurgence with a younger generation that didn't watch it when it was live. But like, I think I was AJ Soprano's exact age when it started. Or
that sounds right.
Maybe not when it started, but like around then. But I remember when it started, it being a big thing with my Italian-American family, with our greater related community in Stamford, Connecticut, which is sort of like a New Jersey or a Connecticut equivalent of some of the New Jersey places featured in the show. That might be an overstatement, but tri-state area.
Yeah.
Similar Italian-American vibes and places and things.
I don't think it's an overstatement. Yeah.
And I think each of us have watched the series many, many times, including again in the last year. And we both have been listening to the Talking Sopranos podcast.
Love the Talking Sopranos podcast. Might be my favorite podcast right now.
Yeah, it's one I listen to every week. Although I did say this to you, but Steve Sciarippa kind of drives me nuts sometimes.
Steve Sciarippa is something. I mean, he's the perfect foil to Michael Imperioli that their thoughts on art and pretty much everything are so different that they are a good pair together. I have a soft spot for Steve Sciarippa because he is a Yankee Stadium Legends frequent guest. So I've met him a bunch of times at Yankee Stadium. And I know what you're saying though.
He'd get a kick out of your story that you can't tell.
I don't know for sure that he knows. I think he knows that story. I haven't connected with him since getting banned from Yankee Stadium, but I'm fairly sure that he was aware of that going down when that went down. Yeah.
There you go. So I guess that's just to set a baseline that you and I are not like people who have just watched The Sopranos once and are talking about the movie, but we've
seen the series multiple times,
thought about these plot lines and these characters and picked up on things and rewatches and like have gone down the YouTube rabbit holes and read we were just talking about Alan Sepinwall before we started recording.
Yeah. And I think you're right that we are probably among the oldest original Sopranos viewers. We're probably the youngest of them, which is interesting. But so we've watched the series multiple times and we've talked about it a lot. I think the series ended before the Two States podcast started.
It did. I remember exactly where I was when it ended.
Okay. Where were you?
I was in Philadelphia. I spent a summer interning at a extinct newspaper there. And my parents mailed me a VHS of a recording of the last episode.
Oh, wow.
Which I do want to talk about at some point in this, not right away. But that was like a very like ingrained memory of like watching it like a day or two after. In fact, I was at a journalism camp where we didn't have access to TV the night it aired. And I don't know if you know the commentator Michael Smirkanish, who's on MSNBC. He was the speaker the next morning after it aired. And I'll never forget this. In like a room full of 40 people, he goes, "Now you guys probably didn't get to watch the Sopranos finale." He goes, "But there was a he goes, there was a mysterious character in a members only jacket who he had interviewed the day, like the morning after it aired."
Oh.
And none of us in the room had any idea. And I literally screamed out in a room full of 40 people, like, "No spoilers," or something. I was just like, "Stop talking. Are you insane?" So anyway, that's my Sopranos finale, which was 2007, I think that was.
Oh, was it really that late? I thought it was
Yeah.
earlier, but yeah, I guess that sounds about right.
Okay, so that's our baseline. And so I have watched the Many Saints of Newark once. We're talking on Sunday. It aired Friday. I watched it Friday night and have been thinking about it since then. You've watched it twice.
I've watched it twice. I've also been thinking about it since then.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to talk to you about it. I feel like a lot has been said and a lot of podcasts have been made leading up to this Sopranos movie. So, you know, the legacy of the Sopranos and previewing this movie has been done to death. But there's not, I think we're among the first to have a discussion reviewing post having seen this movie with spoilers. We're going to talk about the twists and the ending. So if you haven't seen it yet, don't listen to this podcast. Stop right here. We are going to get right into the spoilers for, I think, for both the movie and for the show, The Sopranos, because I think, well, the movie started spoiling things from the show right out of the gate. But yeah, I'm really excited because it's complicated. I think I have some complicated thoughts about the movie. There's a lot there to discuss. I'm still kind of processing how I feel about it. And I'm curious to hear where you're at too. So yeah, what were your thoughts? How did you feel?
It sounded like we had similar reactions. And so maybe we should start with what we did like, because it seems like that is a shorter list, and then we can pick apart some other stuff.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
I mean, it was a fun viewing experience. So I can rattle off a couple big picture things that I liked. And you tell me how this lands with you. So
sure. Why don't we go back and forth? You give me one thing you like, I'll give you one thing that I like.
So one of the things I like is that it actually, in its ambition, felt like a much smaller movie than it could have been. I don't know if that was a budget thing, a COVID thing, but like, I think if, you know, people expecting like a giant blockbuster type movie, which if they had made a Sopranos movie, you know, in 2008, right after the finale, it would have been something like that. I liked how it was a smaller kind of movie. And I also liked how the way it was filmed and the casting and the lighting made it like gritty and sort of like shitty looking. Like it didn't glamorize that era. And this is sort of getting to a second point, and then I'll stop. But, you know, like one of the thematic things about The Sopranos that gets talked about a lot, it was just talked about in this big New York Times Magazine piece that I would, if anyone is at all interested in the legacy of Sopranos or like big interpretations of it, I would highly recommend it. But, you know, people talk a lot about something Tony says in the pilot. I think it's in the first episode when he's talking to Melfi, he talks about this feeling of coming after the good days, you know, that like they came in the afterwards. And that I think is like a very common feeling in the US generationally. It's maybe one of the reasons why people these days are connected with Sopranos. But I think by showing a sort of gritty, shitty version of not just Newark, but these people's community and lives, it sort of dispels that notion that Tony was raised to believe in, that the days of these guys were like the good old days. And it I think points out that like probably everyone thinks they're living after the good old days.
Yeah, I think that's a common and universal feeling, but I think also, I mean, The Sopranos was so much about, you know, I don't know, downfall or just the decline of America, or I don't know, the American dream maybe. And yeah, I think the grittiness of the movie and the fact that it wasn't too polished or too Hollywood was a good aspect to it. It almost was a little bit under the radar in its release. Yeah. I mean, like big Sopranos fans were counting down the days to the release. But to your point, it wasn't as, huge and like blockbustery as it would have been if this movie had come out 10 years ago or
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Like Leslie
or
Odom
whatever.
is a star, but other than that, Joey Coco Diaz is in it, but not a lot of, Ray
Yeah.
Liotta's in it. Ray Liotta's a big name, but it's not like the lead. I forget Alessandro something who plays Dickie.
Yes.
He's basically unknown.
This is kind of like his breakout. Could be his breakout role. He's been in a lot of stuff, but not any like high profile roles. Alessandro Nivola was Dickie Moltisanti. Is it Moltisanti or Te? Moltisanti. Moltisanti.
Moltisanti. The Many Saints.
Moltisanti.
Many Saints.
Oh, that's what that means? I did not even know that. Moltisanti means many saints?
Moltisanti, yeah. It's
Moltisanti
see, of Newark.
This is why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think there were definitely things I missed in my first viewing that I picked up better in my second viewing. And I'm sure there are a few more that we'll come across in this conversation. The thing I have at the top of my list of what I liked about this movie was the acting. I thought, the performance, there were so many great performances. We just mentioned a couple of them. I thought Vera Farmiga as Livia was my favorite performance. Felt like I wish there was more of her. Every scene she was in, I felt like she stole, and she really, really nailed that character. And this movie did feel nostalgic. Like it did feel like we were spending more time with characters we already knew, even though it was all different actors. And I think there were just too many good performances to even list. I'm sure we'll mention them as we get further into this conversation, but Ray Liotta was great. Alessandro Nivola was great. Vera Farmiga, I mentioned, was my favorite. The actor
Michael
who played
Gandolfini.
Junior. Michael Gandolfini was fantastic. Yeah.
I actually, to your point about the actress who plays Livia, part of me would rather just see a movie about Livia and young Tony.
Yeah.
And like not focus on the gangster stuff, because that is the relationship that's at the core of the Sopranos. That's like the exciting relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be on my wish list if I could add scenes to this movie or go back and rewrite it. Yeah, but that was at my top of things. I like. What else? Anything else that you liked about this movie, or what else did you have on your list?
I mean, there were lots of little things that I liked that I think when we start picking it apart will come up. But another sort of big thematic thing that I liked that I thought was cool, and there's been a lot so I listened to a couple interviews with David Chase before it aired, and the whole edition of the Leslie Odom Black character storyline, having like a whole separate plot of Black characters who were always on the margins of the Sopranos. And there's some like thematic similarities where like there's an episode in the initial series where they're trying to pin, I think it's a murder they've committed on unidentified Black males. Mm-hmm. And that is like a recurring thing in this movie. But so the thing that I thought was really cool about that was not only was it just sort of expanding who gets their story told of like Newark and New Jersey at this time, but it provided a really, I think, important context for how we get to Anthony Soprano in North Caldwell, New Jersey, in a mansion in the beginning of the series.
Interesting.
Because they sort of show the historical linkage of the riots in 1967, the white flight that pushes even these like longtime, city Italian American people out of the city into the suburbs. And there's that line in, it's a device I don't like, but when they have Michael Imperioli doing the voiceovers as Christopher, he says that's one of the things that I think made Tony soft.
Yeah.
And it is
half
one of the
pussy,
things,
he says, I think. Yeah.
and to sort of go back to the theme of like Tony feeling like he's disconnected from the good old days. Like, I think one of the messages is it's trying to show that the almost like the geographical, taking these people out of a denser community in the city into the more spread out suburbs. And this is also a very, not quite universal, but for lots of people like you and I who grew up in the suburbs, like this is a big theme in American life, right? Is that when you go out to the suburbs, community is less tightly knit. And there's just a lot that comes with that. So I thought that was a cool like way in which the prequel told us why things in the main series are the way they are. Like it was interesting to have that plot point on a very grand level explain, here's why all these, here's one of the reasons why. It's not just that they've made money and can go off and buy these mansions, but there is like sort of a series of events, just the birth of the suburbs, white flight out of cities, and we see it happen
Yeah.
in this movie.
Yeah, on The Sopranos move to the suburbs. This move made Tony half a pussy in my estimation, Christopher says in the narration.
That's the
quote. The voiceover. Yeah. That's a really interesting point, and I agree with you. I think I probably, now that I think about it, didn't appreciate enough getting that element of the backstory, the context behind the white flight and why these families left Newark and ended up where they ended up, and how that set so many other things in motion. And yeah, I mean, David Chase wanted to tell the story of Newark, New Jersey in this time period. And you certainly, you can't do that without mentioning the race riots and everything that was going on. And we've seen
and also I've heard him say that he wanted to specifically tell the story of the riots, and they thought of this like this is like pre-George Floyd they came up with. Like obviously it's post Ferguson and everything, but specifically I don't think I'm wrong about this. The flashback that's in the main series, there's a couple flashbacks to this time, right, where you see Johnny Boy and Livia as younger people, and you see Tony and Janice as younger people. One of those flashbacks I think takes place during the riots.
It does. It's the one where they go to Playland. Yeah.
Right. So they're in their house and the riots are out there. So I mean, that must have been somewhere in David Chase's brain as like an important event for the history of these characters for years.
Yeah, I also like that. I mean, there was no way to place this story in this time period without having that be, I think, a part of the story. And I think they did a much better, it seemed like they did a much better job in the Many Saints of Newark compared to the original Sopranos series in flushing out Harold's character and showing us, I think it was his girlfriend and girlfriend's son, and his family and motivations. And that felt like a pretty well developed character in a way that, I mean, if you're going to pick apart the original Sopranos series, I think one of the big flaws was how they handled stories of race, and how in general people of color tended to not get that treatment, and you didn't get to see their backstory. They were just accessories, or assassins who were then right. never heard from again after their one episode.
It's interesting. I mean, we're obviously two white guys having this conversation, but it's like, it's not like the main series ever portrayed anyone on The Sopranos in a good light when it came to like racial justice or awareness. But yeah, you're right. Like, I'm trying to think of a Black character specifically in the run of the show that ever had agency. There's like Meadow dates the multiracial guy, and he's like a strong personality, but it like in the later series, like Hesh's girlfriend, there's the guy who they do the housing development stuff with
that very early 2 episodes, storyline with the housing development guy. But that was so early in the series and ended so quickly, and we never heard from them again,
Right. And so it's like they're portraying these like racist Italian American people, but yeah, you don't get that other point of view in the main series anywhere. So it was an interesting choice, and I think added like depth to my mind, was one of the more interesting things about the movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like I just wish we had more time. I feel like if this movie had been half an hour longer, or if it had been a mini series or two movies instead of one movie, we could have gone so much deeper, even into some of those side characters. Like I wanted more of Cyril. Like I wanted to know more about like what had motivated some of Harold's actions when he has his change of heart to go back to New Jersey. It was, I think, better than the original series, but it still felt a little bit rushed. And I don't know, as you said, we're two white guys here. It's not, I don't feel like it's my place to judge how good a job of they did telling the story of some, of some black one, Harold, the black character, and a few other black characters.
I mean,
But
even the story of the riots itself, if you probably timed out Harold versus Dickie, the actual riots themselves are more told through the point of view of Dickie driving through it among like crowds of black people on the street than it is through like the only individual black character I can think of is Harold that the audience knows, and it's really just him like kind of observing, like you don't follow anyone through it. So
yeah, that was such a great point that we saw the riots mainly through Dickie's eyes, a little bit through Tony's eyes, and a little bit through Harold's eyes. It kind of was shifting perspectives, but I guess it's a great example because I could be wrong here, but the way it felt to me on both watches was it did still kind of feel like white people telling black people's story on their behalf,
well,
like
David,
more so than like The Wire or other shows where
right.
I've not gotten that feeling. And I don't know how, I mean, as we, read other perspectives on this movie and hear more from other people in time, we'll see, what the reception really is. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt like, again, it was better than the original Sopranos, but everything happened so quickly that I don't know if it completely landed. And it left me wanting more. Like I felt like we just got a little taste, and it, I guess it was presented as an accessory to like, what we were saying earlier, what led these Italian families to leave Newark and how this related back to, the mafia, which, I mean, that's what the show's about.
Yeah,
But
it's about this one crime family is I guess the thing it comes back to. Well, were there other things that you liked that are worth mentioning before we start picking apart maybe some some other
we hit the
aspects
big
of it?
ones. I mean, I think it was well filmed. It was beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
I loved all the big ensemble scenes, all the big like family meals. Like those were when I really felt most like we were back in the Sopranos world. There were some good sports references back to like 60s
Yeah.
and 70s sports happening in New York and New Jersey.
The
Um,
soundtrack, which the Sopranos always sort of did well. It's like,
a lot of Rolling Stones, but overall good soundtrack.
right.
And I understand why they had so much Rolling Stones, I guess. And the one other thing that I loved was I feel like The Sopranos was always such a, I don't know, deep well of symbolism and things that you can plumb for meaning. And I feel like there was a lot in this movie that I didn't get on the first viewing that I appreciated more on the second viewing. Like, and one example that others have already talked about was the crow being in the garage, the Moltisanti's garage, and then the conversation about the crow that witnessed the first murder that we see in the movie. Like there were things like that that I felt like were just nice touches and like things that I still fully haven't like pieced together that I think are connective tissue that makes The Sopranos as fascinating and as it was originally. And like those are the reasons why we go back and watch and rewatch and rewatch. And I felt like this movie had plenty of that and probably still had more that I haven't even like noticed yet. But yeah, anything else? Those were the big ones for me. Anything else for you that you liked?
Yeah, I mean, your point about just sort of like the group scenes. I think my favorite setting it was cool to see the Soprano family house again. Like it was the same
Yeah,
layout, and like so much in the main series happens in that house, like Livia's living in it in the
Livia's
beginning.
house. Yeah,
That's where Janice kills Richie April. It's where Tony lives when he's out of the house with Carmela, like, so it was cool to like see that again. And I mean, there's tons of I think when you and I were texting about this originally, like if I was judging the movie on a Sopranos fan service level, there was a ton of great stuff. If this was a film on its own that wasn't like referencing a bunch of Sopranos things and it was just like a gangster film on its own, like I don't think I would give it a thumbs up. I think I would,
No,
like,
it does not work as a
like
standalone film.
just a
It
thumbs
doesn't work
up,
at
thumbs
all.
down, like it. Yeah. So
Nobody should watch this movie without having seen The Sopranos first. First of all, because it spoils a lot of Sopranos stuff.
It just wouldn't make sense. But yeah, I mean, I was really hoping for something that could like almost kind of stand on its own and like, I don't know. I mean, so
and that's what David
so,
Chase has said, that he wanted it to stand on its own and feels that it does, but I don't agree. It doesn't. I mean, I didn't mind the fan service. I again, there was so much going on that like, I think there was too much going on. So if there was something you have to cut out, I don't know what it is, but
it was right at 2 hours. Like you could tell they didn't want it over 2 hours, and it probably needed to be like a 3-hour movie.
There was another thing that David Chase has said in interviews, that he believes that movies shouldn't be longer than 2 hours. And he was adamant about not having this be longer, even though if they wanted to do all these things, I feel like it should have been.
I also think he might be a little anachronistic there, because I'm curious, like how many people are actually going to go watch this in a theater?
Yeah, I did a poll on Twitter about this, and I was surprised by how many people. It was actually an even number of people said in the theater versus at home on HBO or HBO Max. I don't know. I feel like more people will watch it at home. And I hope they do, because I would be more disappointed if I had paid $15 or $18 to go see this in movie theater. And I also I needed to pause and rewind. Like there were also things in this movie that confused me, that didn't make sense, that I had to go back and like watch with subtitles on. And that's, I think, what really caused me to not like it, was like some of those confusions. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, I did the same thing. I rewound. I mean, I'm still confused when it's like Tony and his friends, like, was it Jackie Aprile or Tony Blundetto, or like, I know when it was Artie Bucco, but like, I feel like a lot of times some of that fan service referencing things were just so quick, I like didn't appreciate them. But well, maybe, I guess here's a leading question that we can kind of get. What did you just think overall of Dicky Moltisanti as a character, and just his major plot points, which he's the central character? It's getting advertised as a Tony Soprano origin story, but that's, I mean, it kind of is. And we can talk about how it is that, because this makes the case that Dicky looms large, but like, it's obviously this character who's referenced a couple times in the main series. And even like David Chase said, like, we went back and realized there were references to this guy, but it sounded like even David Chase himself didn't know who he was. So they construct the movie around him as like a blank slate with a couple things to fit. But like, what was your just sort of general impression of him as a character and his, I think there's like 3 or 4 beats in the movie that are like sort of his big character development moments.
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with making the movie and this story about him. And I think the performance by Alessandro Nivola was fantastic. He was a believable character. Like, I felt like, very early on in the film, like I was invested in what was happening to him. However, there were a couple of like big things that happened that I just felt like weren't developed. And well, let's just get right into it. Like in this short movie, in this 2-hour span, we witnessed Dicky Moltisanti murdering his father, murdering his Gumar, and those are
who's his stepmom.
Who's also his stepmom. Yes.
He murders his father in defense of this woman he's just brought back from Italy.
Yeah.
Murders his father in a fit of rage, which I kind of found believable, but the murder of I guess she's the mistress at that point. That whole scene I thought was actually just sort of like cheesy and forced. And
Yeah, so both murders I think were believable. What was not believable about the Giuseppina one was like, why would she tell him about that affair at that time? That makes no
Why would
sense.
she
Like
tell
she's
him?
smarter than that. That it almost at that point it was like she just told him that so that she could get murdered, so that his character could like move on to the next. Like that was like her murder was happened for in order to progress Dickie's character and ultimately Tony's character more than it
Did he
making
also just leave
sense.
her floating in the ocean? I guess she
That
sinks.
also didn't make sense. Like, why would he commit a murder in broad daylight at a hotel on
No
like the
one
Jersey
else
Shore?
is
There's
on
gonna be
that beach.
people there. There's no
Yeah.
private beaches in the Jersey Shore. Like, someone's gonna find that body, and
And then
like
when he
they
kills
stayed
his
at the hotel
father,
together.
why? So, I mean, they make the point of he's driving with his murdered father in the passenger seat, leaning forward, not even leaning back. And there's this scene that is like, it's like one of the many things where they show how fucked up the situation is in Newark, where the National Guard sees them. And even though he's sitting next to a murdered guy, bloody and dead, they say, oh, he's white, let him go. Why didn't he put that body in the trunk?
Yeah, so much of the Sopranos series is about the nuts and bolts of disposing of bodies,
Yes, yes. That's a
and
huge
like they
thing.
just glossed over that. And yeah, like again,
Is
we
it
only
because
had
it's
2 hours
pre-DNA, but you're also driving around with a dead guy?
still.
That's not even like an evidence thing. That's a like, you get pulled over, there's a dead guy.
Yeah, so
Does
on
he
top
think the
of
riots or it? That was so weird.
yeah, on top of just the logistics of those murders and him getting away with them feeling a little bit weird and shorthand, the result of us seeing those happen was that Dickie to me always felt like a bad guy in this movie. And like although we saw Tony Soprano and Christopher and all of the main characters of the original series doing horrible things and really being murderers and villains who we shouldn't be rooting for, we spent enough time with them getting to understand their psyche, getting to see them do what they felt was the right thing, that we came to root for them. And that took time. That took hours and hours of spending time with them and their families and their struggles. And we just didn't get enough time with Dickie for him to feel like a balanced character. I know that's what they were trying to do. We saw him being like not as racist as other characters. We saw him like trying to do the right thing by his family, but it
Is
just
that his only redeeming quality? Is that he's like friendlier with Harold, who's running numbers for him? I mean, because I totally agree with you. Is that they don't develop him enough. We're just sort of like told, hey, he's a nice guy, but he's still like a murderer and a criminal like all the other ones. And maybe it's a thing of time, but like I was just nodding my head a lot because everything you said makes sense. Like that was just sort of like presented to the audience, but it didn't seem earned.
yeah, yeah. So long-winded answer, but I like the character, but I just felt like it it didn't quite land because we got so much bad. And as you said, we were told he was good. We didn't see enough of him being good.
Right. We both listened to this Slate podcast with Alan Steppenwall, who, famously like chronicled the show for the Star Ledger and has written books about it. And I think probably has better access to like David Chase and the internal psyche of the creation of the show than anyone outside the show, right? And he
Yep.
said, and I mean, so he explained that one of the things it's trying to show is that Dickie was a positive role model for Tony. They say he's the only one he listens to, and that if Tony had Dickie in his life, maybe he wouldn't have gone down this path. And then he also said, if Dickie hadn't have died, and we'll get to Dickie's death, but if Dickie hadn't died, Tony asks Dickie to get basically antidepressants for his mother and talk to his mother. And Sepinwall's making the point of like, if Dickie had been around, he could have been a better influence on Tony, and maybe he could have helped Livia deal with her problems. And then that could have also saved Tony because, the biggest influence on Tony's life and psyche is his mother and the fucked up relationship they have. But as you were saying that, I was like, that might have been like the intention, and like maybe that's a thing like David Chase has said to him, but it just did, like, I wasn't persuaded that if Dickie Moltisanti lived, he would have it would have just been like all these other gangsters where they think they're going to be the good guy or they're going to get out of it. But I mean, I think like one of the, the main series is very fatalistic in a lot of ways, and it almost seems like a thematic contradiction to think that if Dickie Moltisanti lives, Tony's going to be healthier and Livia and Tony are going to have a healthier relationship, because this is also a murderer who like murders two people in fits of rage and is, committing crime to take care of his family.
Yeah, and like he says, as he said, you can't control what a kid is going to do. You can only hope to set them up in the best position possible and let them make their own choices. There were so many pressures on Tony to fall into this life, which we saw existed even in the brief period at the end of the movie when Dickie was trying to not talk to him and get him to not, enter a life of crime and not, join up with the mob. But you really hit on it. My least favorite thing in this movie was the Elavol, was that the name of the antidepressant storyline, where Tony,
something like that.
I first of all didn't buy in the first place that Livia would open up to Tony in that way about that conversation with the doctor and give him the brochure like that. I loved the Livia and Tony scenes, but the tail end of that scene, like where she, like, why would she give him the brochure in the first place? Like, that just didn't.
Why would she have even kept it, right?
Yeah,
Livia Soprano wouldn't have even kept that. She would have immediately thrown it out.
Exactly, and she would have been too embarrassed to even mention that. And then, like, for us to spend that crucial time in the movie with Tony going to Dickie and asking Dickie to get antidepressants for his mother, I just didn't believe it. And that was based on like.
And then he has the box in the car at the end. And it's like, oh, he was a good guy. But it's like, she wasn't going to take him.
Yeah, first of all, it was this, alternate universe, or this what if of, if Dickie had lived, then maybe everything would have been different. I don't buy that. I think it still would have wound up the same because she wouldn't have taken it. And also, so much time on The Sopranos was spent talking about the stigma around mental health and antidepressants and talking to a therapist. And like, okay, so maybe this experience with young Tony was part of what gave him that stigma and turned him away from, mental health. Like maybe that was something that he then didn't kind of rethink until later in life when he started having panic attacks. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't buy that. Like, I don't buy that in 1972, when there was so much more stigma than in 1999, that Tony would have felt comfortable having that conversation with Dickie, and that Dickie would have entertained it. Like, we've been, I don't know. Maybe
were, it was a Valium that, there's like the stereotype of that. But you hit on a thing that I was thinking too, which is the main series, and I'm, again, this is another thing where like, I'm not an expert in this, but like have heard other people who are like, say positive things about its depiction of psychiatry, and it at least treats it as like a complex subject, and over the course of 86 Sopranos episodes, and like Melfi's one of the best characters, those are some of the best scenes, they at least get to like delve into a lot of the major questions. And one of the recurring themes, because Tony is always like, this isn't working, I'm not helping, she says it takes time, it's not like there's magic bullets, you're doing better on whatever he's on at a given episode than you would have. So to have the movie almost treat it like it's a video game where all young Tony needs to do is get his uncle to get the pills and get those pills and give it to his mother, and then he's going to have a happy childhood and not become Tony Soprano,
didn't work.
Like totally undermines that and doesn't treat it with like the level of complexity. That's why I wish there was a lot more, because I agree with you. I mean, like the guidance counselor scene with Tony and Livia, I thought was one of the best ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that scene.
That moment of like, it actually shows more about why Livia is the way she is, because Johnny's the way he is, Johnny Boy Soprano, and like she is, obviously not happy in her marriage. She's not getting the emotional support she needs. So the guidance counselor hears this story of a time where she like cuddles Tony and reads him stories as a source of comfort that she's not getting from her husband. It made me think of the scenes in the main series where Tony's like, don't you love me? And, like yearning for, and it's the thing he talks about with Melfi a lot. He's sort of yearning for that matriarchal love, that motherly love that he's always been denied. But yeah, that was Dickie's role in the whole thing just seemed very forced.
Yeah. And
they tried to do too much with Dickie there by making him like the missing ingredient that explains everything, rather than just Chris's dad was an interesting guy who Tony looked up to.
Exactly. Yeah. And I wish we had spent that time instead getting a little more insight into how Dickie's death led to Tony breaking bad or deciding that he was going to go into this life. Right. Because I liked how we saw Tony as this innocent, young, still trying to do the right thing, still trying to avoid, still wanting to go to college, wanting to be on the football team, not wanting to smoke pot. Like this was completely unlike the grown-up Tony who we know from, the original series. But we also saw Tony, young Tony running the numbers game at school and beating up the Mr. Softy guy. So we saw both sides where he's like, on the one hand, like he's very innocent and is trying to do the right thing. On the other hand, the signs are there that he is kind of like getting into trouble and like is,
his dad's Johnny Boy Soprano. His dad's like every male role model in this kid's life is in the mafia. They're going to jail. How many funerals are in this movie? At least 2, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not like but the guy who's supposed to be the nicest of the mob guys is going to be his like great role model that's going to steer him into a different career.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I didn't really also believe how Dickie dying and the pinky swear like pushed Tony. That was like the last straw that caused Tony to ultimately like, become part of the mafia. Like you would think, if anything, it would have the opposite effect. He sees this guy who he idolizes murdered and, gone too soon. Like I would more believe that would scare Tony straight. And he would be like, I don't want this to happen to me. Like the pinky swear was about Tony doing the right thing and making good choices. It wasn't about like defend my legacy, avenge my death, like be there for the family. It was about do the right thing for you. Like don't like, be good, like, be a moral person. And so to flash back to that pinky swear and to imply that Dickie's death had this impact on Tony, I just didn't see enough to connect those dots.
You know what it also felt like? And I mean, I am sympathetic to they're trying to sort of retcon this backstory that doesn't exist in the main one, but they kind of did that in the main series when Tony Blundetto, Tony B, Steve Buscemi's character comes back in, a guy who they've never mentioned in the course of like 4 or 5 seasons. And all of a sudden he shows up and they go, oh, your best friend from childhood, your cousin who you're super tight to, who's been in prison this whole time, and we've never heard a peep about him. And they kind of like manufacture this whole backstory that, in the course of the series, you sort of are like, okay, but to see it happen a second time. So you just touched on it, and I think because we're going over the big points, the big plot points of the movie and Dickie Moltisanti, can we talk about how and why he gets killed?
I think we have to. Yeah. So I think
let's start with the main series.
Okay.
The main
yeah.
Probably the most we hear about Dickie Moltisanti is the episode. I think it's even a season premiere, maybe.
Yeah, it's for early in a season if it's not a premiere.
It's like after like Christopher's made and he maybe just got a promotion, and Tony, after a night out, drives him to a cop's retirement party and says that guy, and there's a crooked cop, he's the guy who killed your father. And now that he's retired, have at it. You have permission to take him out. And the cop, when
So
he's
it's not true. Yeah.
Where's that said, you're being lied to. And Christopher famously says, it wouldn't matter anyway. He wants you dead. So the audience is basically told there's something off here. This isn't it's either not the whole story or it's not true at all.
And like so many threads of the original Sopranos TV show, it's never resolved. We never find out whether it was true or not. You're left to kind of, make that decision for yourself as a viewer. And like those mysteries were such a huge part of what made The Sopranos compelling, and makes The Sopranos still compelling to go back and watch. But yeah, I mean, at the time, I kind of believed it. Like, I think I felt more like Tony was probably telling the truth than not. I didn't think a ton of it at the time. I've thought a lot more about it. And in rewatching that episode in the lead up to this movie, I questioned it more, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chris is led to believe, and this was like, I think it wasn't just in that episode that story was told. The story that was going around was that Dickie was killed by a crooked cop, right? Like Chris wasn't hearing that for the very first time in that episode.
You're right. Chris hears something like that. And Chris also knew that he was a baby when it happened. And I think they talk about something like he was unpacking Christmas presents, or he was getting ready to deliver Christmas presents to him, which happens in the movie. And so, like, for people like us who probably went into the movie assuming the end was going to be, we see how he really dies.
Yep.
And you're sort of led to believe that there's going to be some ultimate showdown between him and Leslie Odom.
Yep. So that was the other thing, was that, yeah, it seemed as if the other main reason for including Harold as a character, as a main character, was that Harold starts out working for Dickie as, basically running the numbers game in some of the black neighborhoods. Ultimately, they have a falling out based on Harold wanting to start up his own numbers game and not wanting to be an employee in, an Italian and in a white run organization that was not, treating him as an equal. And then ultimately more things happen. There's the whole thing around Giuseppina, which also I felt like wasn't well set up, but they become enemies.
Forced.
Very forced. It was almost like, we haven't done enough to make these guys enemies. Let's throw in one more thing to make them, make this a mortal feud between the two. And so we're led to believe that this is Dickie's arch nemesis, who says in the movie, I gotta deal with this Italian guy. If I don't kill him, he's gonna kill me.
Yeah.
So that's where it feels like we are heading, that either Harold or somebody in Harold's crew is going to take out Dickie because that's what Harold wants. Ultimately, that's not what happens. And this was the big twist, or the big surprise, the big shock at the end of the movie.
Yeah. Do you want to say
Uncle Junior?
It was Uncle Junior, for the pettiest of petty reasons.
This was something that I kind of,
I have a lot of thoughts.
I kind of like this decision. Like, this surprise definitely, like, when I was watching this movie for the first time, at this point, I'm kind of like, this has kind of been disappointing. And when that happened, I was like, oh shit. Like, I didn't see that coming. Like, now I kind of see, like, we got all those shots of Junior being upset and cursing out Dickie earlier, but wow, this is really interesting. Like, what does this mean going forward? So the shock worked. I would not have guessed it was coming. It did kind of feel like a genuine, like, I don't know, plot twist, like something that could have happened in, a Sopranos finale that also would have just kind of stunned the audience and just, been a nice payoff to that misdirect. However, the more I thought about it, like, the less I believed it, because we saw time and time again in the original Sopranos, you can never keep a secret. No secret gets kept. Everything gets out. Like, Uncle Junior didn't commit this murder. Somebody else did it, and people talk, and like, word gets back. And I don't know if Junior and his crew could have really kept this secret from Tony and everybody else for 30 years.
Right. And it's weird too, because this was not a thing in the course of the whole Sopranos episode. So it's not like Dominic Chianese, who plays Uncle Junior, who's like one of the best characters of the whole show, I think.
Oh yeah,
Like I'm
if not the best. Yeah, he's right up there.
on Talking Sopranos, people are constantly saying he's their favorite character. Well, they're asking people, and for good reason. But it's not like every time he's having a scene with Christopher in the back of his head, he's like, "I killed your father," which he would be in the real. So this is one of the things that, like, establishing this fake back, not a fake backstory, but like establishing this as a backstory is just weird. I love Junior, and my very first gut reaction was, because it is so petty, and it's sort of like you said, a twist that it's like actually not for a good reason. It's like, it's not even Dickie Moltisanti's fault that Junior falls and hurts his hip. He just laughs at him.
Yeah.
Right? So
yes,
it's showing that Junior is so petty and so vain, and so that he would do this. So my immediate thing is like, oh, it's funny. It was Uncle Junior the whole time. But then, like 5 minutes passed, an hour passed. I'm like, I don't think this holds up at all. And I'll throw another reason in why. He kills a made guy over a simple infraction. And throughout the course of the show, we're shown that killing made guys is always a consequential thing that is not done lightly and doesn't come without consequences, right? So like, how does the rest of the family get told it was a crooked cop who did it?
There's no evidence. Yeah.
And there's no evidence. And like one of the very first plot points of it's like maybe in the first episode is Uncle Junior wants to kill Pussy Malanga at Artie Bucco's restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a thing that, to your point, people are talking about it, but it's going to be like a sanctioned hit.
Yep.
He's killing a made guy. So it's a sanctioned hit. It's a big deal. This makes it seem like Junior's able to just call up some random dude to shoot another guy in his crew who's like a contemporary and friends. It just seemed cheap the more time passed and the more I thought about it.
Yes, we never, in the entire series of Sopranos, in all 86 hours, we never saw evidence that this family or any other mafia family could commit this type of a murder of a made guy and not have it result in that family relentlessly trying to figure out what happened and get revenge.
Yeah, especially now when they're much stronger than they're supposed to be in the main series.
Now, maybe we're bent to believe that with all the complexity and with Harold's crew at war with Dickie's crew, like maybe it got lost in that confusion. I don't know, but like everything you said, I didn't buy that. And like, now, was Dickie a made guy? Do we know that for sure? Like, was he like one level below that?
I think basically everyone we see at that point in those rooms. I mean, he's got an audience. They have that David Chase cameo where he comes in as the head of the DeMeo crime family. He's in those rooms at the funeral. Like he's in that audience. He's in that inner circle. Like all those guys are made guys.
Okay. Yeah, you might be right. This was something that I had a tougher time following. Like in the original Sopranos series, what helped was we got the FBI's perspective where they were always laying out clearly, all right, here's the boss, here's the 4 people reporting to the boss, here's the tree, and like they explained it to us in case it wasn't clear. Right.
You also get like the ceremonies where like Chris and other people are made. You get Tony saying, you're the captain of this crew now. Like,
true.
Like only there's, the episode where it's like only Silvio and Paulie talk to me now. Like nobody else talks to me.
Yeah, but like in this, so I guess if I'm understanding correctly, David Chase DeMeo was the boss at the time.
Yeah.
Johnny Boy Soprano is like at the next level down, I guess, below him.
Well, the next level is like captain, so there's only so many of them, but there's Johnny, a lot of guys below that who are still made guys. Made just means you're in La Cosa Nostra for life. You're in this thing of ours. You're committed to it, and you're Italian. They can trace you back to the old country. Like you've decided on this life, this career, and you're in it, and that comes with certain protections of being in the family. And it just seems like basically all the characters were presented with, except Harold. Like, there's not a lot of lower level guys shown.
True. But like when we
Ray
in the
Liotta in jail as his uncle says, I killed a made guy.
Yep. Yeah, we haven't even talked about him yet.
Yeah.
In the Sopranos TV series, though, like there was Junior and he had his crew. Before he became boss, there was Tony and he had his crew. Like there were different crews.
They were captains because Jackie Aprile was the boss in the beginning.
And that was another thing. We got no. I don't think we got any Apriles in this movie, or if they were in this movie, I don't know where they were.
I think Jackie Aprile is the guy with him. That Alan Sepinwall. I thought it was Tony Blundetto, but Alan Sepinwall said the guy who Tony like beats up in the sandwich fight, and when he's that. I
heard that too, which also doesn't really make sense because like
I thought it was because I thought the parents are when they're telling the story of him stealing the ice cream truck. I thought they mentioned Tony Blundetto. So maybe he's also there.
They did. So they had said that Tony Blundetto told Janice about the ice cream.
Okay, so that doesn't mean Tony B is there, but maybe and that's how they get Tony Blundetto referenced in it.
Now, there were 3 people there, and I paused that scene and rewatched it. It was clearly Tony and Artie and a third guy who didn't look like Steve Buscemi. So maybe that was Jackie with them.
Jackie Aprile.
But then the kid outside the phone booth doesn't look like Jackie, doesn't look like Steve Buscemi, and didn't seem like a mob type guy. Like he seemed like just some high school kid, like some punk.
Right.
And like
and the other thing about that scene, obviously, is that we get a Carmela sighting, but that's basically it. There's no other,
I would have loved to get more Carmela. Yeah, not nearly enough.
A scene between them or meeting. Like it was a weird. And in fact, that whole plot device towards the end of like he's trying to find Uncle Dickie because he needs his Rolling Rock was like such a weird way to do that.
Yeah, it was.
It felt like that's why he kept calling him up, not because he wanted to see his uncle. It was because he like really needed the beer.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Unfortunately, we've talked a lot about it and in previous 2 states, but it had that Game of Thrones feel where it was like, all right, we got to get these 5 balls in motion. So what events can we have happen to get all these boxes checked by the end of this 2 hours? And that really felt like things were happening just for the sake of pushing the plot forward in like the last half an hour that didn't totally make sense, weren't like enjoyable scenes. And like, yeah, calling him to ask for Rolling Rock and that whole conversation, like, I don't know, could that scene have worked with more context and more time to kind of like envelope it in stuff that was better, I guess. But
I mean, yeah. If you want to make the Livia angle more important, why isn't the heightened thing at the end somehow involving Livia and not Rolling Rock? He's trying to get in touch with Uncle Dickie because his mom needs help, and there's like a ticking clock there.
She has some kind of a breakdown or something. Yeah.
There's a fight between her and Johnny Boy. I mean, I don't know. I'm just like, but it seems like if that was, and I believe Sepinwall, and he has access to better information, and he's looking, you know, if that's one of the messages, right? That because he had the antidepressants in the car. Okay, I have basically one smaller thing that there's a bunch of examples of, and then I have a big thing I want to talk about at the end. I don't know.
Okay, we've covered most of my list of things I didn't like and did like. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my small thing is, and again in this podcast interview, which I keep referring to, but he said something like that they admitted that there were going to be timing problems. There were a lot of things with characters that didn't add up based on the main series in terms of timelines. So one of the very first things, it was like one of my top 3 things when it got over that I thought about is in the scene that we hear about in the main series that we see in this of Johnny Boy shooting through Livia's beehive. The other people in the car are Dickie and Chris's mom, whose name, and they do such a poor job. Joanne, right. They do such a bad job with female characters who are Livia in this too, by the way, that it's like,
yeah, seriously.
In the main series of The Sopranos, Joanne and Livia are not contemporaries, and we're never led to believe they are. And it's never suggested that they would be like on double dates or contemporaries. Joanne's much younger.
Yep.
She, I mean, I think she's at Livia's funeral in that like famous scene, but like there's no like she never visits Livia. Livia never asks about her. You think
She
it
seems
made
to be closer to Carmela's age. Yeah.
yes, she seems to be close, right? Because isn't the thing that Christopher's blood relation comes through? He's actually Carmela's cousin.
Which I wanted more of that backstory too. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
like I mean, that's a way if you're gonna throw Carmela in there, at least in a throwaway line, show how Carmela is related to the Multisantes.
Right?
So that was a thing that bothered me because I'm like, because she's not a contemporary, and even like thinking of how old Livia is in the main series, and then how old Chris's mom is, like that doesn't line up. And if they are going on double dates in the 60s and 70s, they would have had a different relationship in the main series where they had no relationship.
Yep.
Um, and this, the other, I think there are a couple examples of this, but the other one that really bothered me is Silvio.
Yeah. This one was on my list too.
Paulie's older, and I buy that Big Pussy's older too, but like Silvio and Tony are supposed to be contemporaries.
Yep.
And I looked it up because I remembered there's like an origin story given, and it's actually Ralph Cifaretto tells, I think Jackie Aprile Jr. You know, there's the Feature Lamont card game that a bunch of people have stuck up, and there's a bunch of stories about that. And he tells a story about how when Tony and Silvio did that, that was the thing that put them and their crew on the map.
Yep.
But according to the Many Saints of Newark, not only is Silvio much older than Tony, because he's also in the first half where we're not even at teenage Michael Gandolfini, we're at like 8-year-old Tony Soprano, and Silvio's already like one of the guys.
Yeah.
But then
And he's wearing
like,
a toupee. Yeah.
And he's wearing
like he looks old.
I mean, that was funny, and seeing him do like the Stevie Van Zandt impression was funny, but like the timing of it didn't make any fucking sense to me because he's like already an established guy in the crew. And I think even in like the main series, which like I'll forgive him for this, like in the first couple episodes, it's not clear if Silvio is in the family or if he just owns the Bing, and then they're like, oh, he's such a good character, we're gonna make him the consigliere. But yep. So I don't know if you had any things like that with like timing that seemed to stick out or bother you. Those were like the two big ones for me that just seemed to really not make sense.
Yeah, you know, I'm okay with when David Chase says these characters, they're liars, they're not reliable narrators, so there will be inconsistencies because they're the ones telling the story, and you know, it's their story, and they're going to have inconsistencies. So I'm okay with that. And there were some inconsistencies for the Playland scene where Johnny Boy gets arrested at the card game at the carnival. Where he brings Jan, where Tony, sneaks there and goes and sees. Like there too, there were some changes that were made or differences. The Silvio one, though, I had a problem with too. We got Silvio multiple times calling Tony kid, and he looks like he's like 15 years older. And okay, I think the understanding was that he was a little bit older in the original series, but they're contemporaries. They're in the roughly the same age, even though I think James Gandolfini is actually quite a bit older than Stevie Van Zandt. Or I think he, maybe not quite a bit, but I think he was older. And yeah, that didn't make sense to me. And yeah, like, okay, so it was true in the Sopranos TV show that part of what made Tony interesting was that he became kind of this boy king, where he was the boss, but he was managing all of these captains and people in his crew who were much older than him. And as a result, kind of questioned his leadership. And like, ultimately, he's able to keep them in line. But that was part of what made him a fascinating boss, was that unlike Junior, like he was way young. He was like the youngest person in the room in a lot of scenes. And yet he was this charismatic leader who had assumed, the boss role. And I suppose, like, at this moment where this movie takes place, like, he's just on the cusp of entering the mob. They're all already in. So, we have that divide. But to your point, the age difference felt too extreme. And that was especially true for Silvio, because, like, Silvio and Paulie aren't supposed to be the same age. Paulie's supposed to be way older. And if anything, Paulie seemed younger than Silvio in this movie.
Right. And I think this is a point where like the fan service hurt, because if you're going to do true fan service, you would have had Paulie in those scenes, but not Silvio. If you wanted to
Yes.
get Silvio in, you could have found a different way to do it, maybe like a single scene. But obviously, they just wanted to have Silvio in it a lot.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think the acting was good. There, some of the performances, people assess, were they acting in this role or was it an impersonation? Like, was it like a Saturday Night Live version of this character? And I think, Silvio, maybe to a lesser extent, Paulie, were probably the two where, again, it didn't take me out. Those performances didn't detract from my enjoyment of this movie. But I think those are the two most extreme examples of fan service where, like, people change their style and the way they talk and the way they do their hair and the way they dress as they get older. So for these two guys to be dressing and talking and acting the same way at age 25 as they're going to at age 55 or 65, like, again, it's for fan service. Like, so it didn't ruin the movie for me, but I had to kind of suspend disbelief a little bit. And I don't know, like, it was on my list too as things that didn't completely work and just didn't feel so. Like, Sopranos was so known for being anti-fan service and doing the opposite of the things that the fans want, spurning like what you would think that the fans would be looking for, and telling stories and going off in directions that are unexpected. I get that it's been 15 years, and so now, like, it's more okay to kind of have a reunion and to kind of just get back into the world and check back, or go back and look at these characters that we know decades beforehand. So it's different circumstances, and I think fan service is more appropriate in this movie and at this time than it would have been in the original series. However, like, I don't know, it was just like, in trying to deliver those fan service things and trying to do so much more and developing so many new characters, Dickie, along with a bunch who we haven't even mentioned, plus Harold and all of the complicated race issues that go along with his story, that's a lot to have to try to accomplish in just 2 hours. And again, while the fan service was, it's not that it wasn't enjoyable, it was time spent that could have been better spent embellishing, really the reason why we all came, or, like, I don't know, like the story and like the message.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts before I go to my last thing?
I was open to liking the Christopher voiceover, but ultimately really hate the Christopher voiceover.
Yeah.
Really hate it.
It seems so anti-David Chase too.
Yeah, again, like, I was okay with this movie being different from The Sopranos and breaking Sopranos rules, and and again, like, Sopranos did have dream sequences and it did weird things at times. I think
they must have been worried people wouldn't have been able to follow it who had only like watched The Sopranos once years ago,
or maybe wanted it to be more connected to the series and like give us a reason for why we should care about the Moltisanti family. Right. But
I mean, they market it as like a Tony Soprano origin story,
Yeah, like, again, I think that voiceover, number one, was really prevented this from being a standalone thing. Like, those voiceovers wouldn't make sense if you hadn't watched Sopranos, and if you hadn't watched Sopranos, would impede your ability to enjoy the Sopranos series. And for me, like, I was very critical, like many people, of the final two seasons, or like, the final season of Sopranos, 6A and 6B, or 6 and 7. And the finale, I don't have a huge issue with, but one of my biggest issues in that, yeah, go ahead.
So here you're getting to my last thing. Because I actually really like.
Yeah. All right, you say it. We'll say it's the same thing.
I really like 6A and 6B.
Okay, I don't. I really hate 6A and 6B. I feel like
I especially like 6B. And so here's the thing I liked in the movie. And I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this. We may have in passing. As I've watched it again and again and read about it, I know people debate the ending. I don't actually think there is a debate. I think it is either people who rightfully see that Tony is killed at the end, and people who are in denial and ignoring all the obvious clues that, especially through 6B, are just put in front of the audience like spoon, and especially when you rewatch it. And if you watch,
and it's movie now too, even more so in the movie. Yeah.
Right. And so if you watch 6B as the story of Tony getting killed at the end,
yep,
like every episode just has a Carmela, what's going to happen if you die? You know,
yep.
talking to Johnny Sack, 99% of the way this ends is you go to jail or you get killed. Bobby Bacala, I think it just goes to black. Silvio's sitting at that table when the guy gets whacked, and he doesn't hear it. And then he, in a second scene, tells people, I didn't even hear it when it came. You know, there's just all these things again and again. I even there's an interesting thing that people have pointed out, that when Junior shoots him and he's in the hospital and he almost dies, that is actually you're seeing in reverse what is going to happen when he does get killed.
Oh, interesting.
Because you see how things are already starting to come apart when people don't think he's going to make it. Like Paulie and Vito stop kicking up money to Carmela.
Yeah.
And you see how like they're not going to be there for Carmela. And like they basically show what the aftermath is going to be like, and then they rerun the whole thing. So and you know, people have dissected the last scene. It's a nod to The Godfather. It's him looking at the door, and there's the beat, and then the beat when it should be his point of view looking at the door again is black because he's just gotten shot in the head. The movie once again winks at the audience, and it's that scene where he says, I saw a guy got shot in the back at Coney Island, Playland, wherever they are. I hope that never happens to me. And it does happen to him. And then Dickie Moltisanti goes, well, that won't happen as long as I'm around. He's not around, and it does happen to him. And I got an argument with my brother today because my brother's a person who loves The Sopranos, but is like Steve Sciarippa in Talking Sopranos, in denial about the ending. Or because it is not, because you don't see the blood splattered all over the table. And because David Chase, obviously for a million reasons, isn't going to just say it.
Well, maybe you think I'm in denial too. I'm going to defend Steve Sciarippa here. I'm going to defend my
Steve Sciarippa says, I think he goes out and lives a happy life, which you have not been paying attention to.
No, I don't think that's what Steve Sciarippa says. I think Steve Sciarippa says you can believe whatever you want to believe. This TV show, the story is what we see on the scene. After it fades to black, if you want to believe that Tony's killed, you can believe that. If you want to believe that he goes on and lives a happy life, you can believe that.
I think that's more what Imperioli says. I think Steve Sciarippa a couple times has said,
he might be right.
He goes on and lives a happy life. Because Steve Sciarippa,
maybe I'm conflating those two.
He also says unrealistic things about Janice in the.
Which one does? Steve Sciarippa does?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know that I fully agree with his Janice takes. Okay, maybe I agree with Michael Imperioli's take that it's intended to be ambiguous and intended to be able to be interpreted both ways. I'm with you. I think I'm not 100% that Tony gets killed, but I was maybe like 65% he gets killed, 35% he doesn't, and I'm okay with either. After seeing this movie, it maybe pushed that up to 75% because we get all those things you mentioned. This movie ends with him at Holston's. What's that? Right.
Oh, and we haven't even talked about Holston's. The movie ends with Tony alone at Holston's.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, I like that idea that he's killed there. I think that makes sense. The clues are there. It adds up. It was set up. But I don't feel like we needed to see it. Like I don't think we needed to see him getting shot,
right?
For it to be a satisfying ending. So I'm fine with the finale. Maybe my least favorite thing about the final season, 6A and 6B. And, you know, on the rewatch, I'm more okay with the AJ stuff. I think that's aged pretty well, and I'm able to appreciate the AJ stuff more now than I did at the time. The Vito stuff as well, I enjoyed. I think on the rewatch, while I was like, come on, let's get back to like the main characters when it was happening at the time. The thing that I didn't like at the time and still don't like was Christopher's death.
Yeah.
It was set up. Yes, they did have us heading in that direction. He and Tony were growing apart. He was falling off the wagon. Tony was growing to distrust him. However, it wasn't enough setup. Like, I still, like, after we spent years and years of Tony treating Chris like his son and setting up Chris to be his successor and investing so much of his life and just, so much of himself into this relationship with Christopher, I you know I didn't buy that death when it happened. And like, I don't know,
I
I
agree
wish
with
it.
you on that, and I think it was a matter of time, right? Because there's also in those last two seasons, there's time jumps that
Yep.
are hard to track sometimes, and like especially around Christopher, it's like all of a sudden, Chris Kelly's in an episode, then they're married, then he has a kid. Like there's time jumps with Christopher, and it felt rushed. Yes,
Yep.
but I think ultimately, the show's not about Christopher, and I think it did justice to Tony.
Yeah, and I also get that at that point in the series, they were really trying to establish why Tony was irredeemable and was
Yeah.
a bad guy and shouldn't be someone who we sympathize and root for. And killing Christopher was, I think, a crucial plot element to get the audience more to that point. However, like, yeah, it felt rushed. I didn't buy it. Just the way it was, the way that scene happened just was dissatisfying to me. And I don't think it did Christopher's character really justice. And this movie doubles down so hard on that death. And like, also, like, again, I'm not trying to excuse Tony for killing Christopher, but when we're seeing 18-year-old Tony or 20-year-old Tony, he hasn't killed Christopher yet. So do we really need Christopher's voice in the back saying, this fucking asshole, this is who I went to hell for? Like, it takes us out of the moment. And like, I don't know, maybe that's what David Chase intended, was for us to be reminded that this is where Tony will ultimately wind up.
Yeah.
But it really pulled me out of the Many Saints story and reminded me of something that I didn't like about The Sopranos at multiple times, when that just felt unnecessary.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, like Sepinwall says that thing about they originally didn't have the voiceover, and then it was like a year after they shot the movie, they added the voiceover. So maybe it was like, I think one of the other things going on in the background that I heard in when David Chase was on Mark Maron, it's he was originally going to direct it, but his wife, and they're like high school sweethearts, is having like I don't know the extent of the health problems, but it seems like
Yep.
enough where that took him off the ability to direct. So I wonder if it would have been different if he had more control, or if it was the studio saying like, look, we need to market this thing and people like The Sopranos. So Michael Imperioli as sort of like the second lead of the TV show, and now especially with Talking Sopranos as sort of like the with Gandolfini
He's carrying the torch. Yeah. Yeah.
he's like the keeper of the legacy.
Yep.
So it's
And that's why I was okay with it as an introduction. Like, if it had just been the very first scene and then like maybe one callback at the end, I would have been more okay with it. But it was, yeah, it was too much of it. And it pulled me away and reminded me of something I didn't want to be reminded of.
yeah. Um, it reminded me of something I didn't want to be reminded of. Well, I like being reminded of The Sopranos, but there were a lot of things in this that I didn't like. So
Yeah.
overall,
But
I
I
would
will
say,
say,
well, I was just gonna say for Sopranos fans, it's obviously worth watching. I don't know how many times I'm gonna rewatch this.
yeah, I'd probably rewatch 80 hours of The Sopranos before I'd rewatch this movie.
Yeah,
I've already watched it once though. But like, here's the thing: even though I found it to be disappointing and a bit confusing, and I don't know, while I had a lot of issues with it, I still, even after the first watch, I found myself wishing there will be another movie, another sequel, because I do love spending time in this world. I do love these characters. Like, I'll still go back again, and I think a lot of these issues weren't so much the what, it was the how, and not having enough time in 2 hours to accomplish so many ambitious undertakings that, that they wanted to try to get done.
Yeah. If they do another one, it seems obvious that you have Michael Gandolfini do like the true rise of Tony Soprano kind of story. And, that could be a totally different movie.
Yeah, I think so. I hope they do it. It seems, this is getting so much attention, and it's such a common thing for, media companies to go back and reboot franchises that, they know are going to be successful, that they know people are going to pay attention to, that it seems more likely than not that we get something additional. And I hope we do. Because again, like I do want to spend more time with these characters. I want some of these questions answered. There was plenty in there that I did like. It's I still love The Sopranos. And yeah, we'll have to talk about it again if and when that does happen.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to end.
Good stuff. Well, yeah, it's thanks for talking through it. It sounds like we were mostly on the same page about it, and even though we had different thoughts about the Sopranos final season, it sounds like we're on the same page about what worked for Sopranos prequel.
All right, I'm decided to